Another episode of It's All Trash. I am here with the man, the myth, the legend, James Hankins. Mr. James, how you doing today, James?
You know, if I complained, I'd be lying. You know, it's a good day. It's a good day. It's hot out here in Houston. A lot of humidity, but you know, if it were anything else, then it wouldn't be a good day. You know, so I'm happy to be here. Excited about this.
So happy that you're here. We start our podcast off with a little check-in. I see y'all work every day, right? What is your rose and what is your thorn?
Rose. Okay, we can start with roses.
Mm-hmm.
I got to officiate a wedding a couple weeks ago.
Aww.
One of the better times I've had officiating a wedding. I happen to be the only black person at this wedding, which has happened before. Yeah, true story. This happens all the time. So I happen to be the only black person at this wedding. So briefly, at the rehearsal, I gave a little prayer. And before I gave the prayer, I told everyone, hey, look, I am not an ordained minister. I am not a preacher. I'm not a reverend. So
You're
when
not?
you see me, you know, people might think I might be, but I'd have to be a priest, and I'd have to give up a bunch of things I'm not trying to give up.
No, you can become an officiant. You don't.
I'm an officiant, right? But because I'm Catholic, I'm not. I can't be an ordained minister. I can't become a priest, or preacher, or a reverend. That would mean I'm a priest. And they take vows that I'm not ready to take the vows that they take. So you know how it is. So I gave this little prayer before I said, just FYI. I am going to be about 4 whiskeys in at some point in time during the rehearsal, just so you know I'm not actually a reverend, so you don't judge me because of that. Got a good little laugh, the people enjoyed it, etc. Next day, at the wedding, go through the ceremony. People seemed to enjoy it. I think it went really well. And as soon as the DJ hit, I was out there wilding out. Me and my guests, we were out there cutting up, drinking, having a good time, etc., dancing, partying, right? The next day, I go to the airport, walk into the airport with this family that I happen to know. These folks are sitting there. The wife of the family had not walked up yet. She starts to walk up, and the husband in that family said, hey, remember him? She's like, yeah. He was the preacher at the wedding or whatnot. He was like, yeah, my wife, you know, she saw you give the ceremony. She thought you did a phenomenal job. Everything went great. But then when she saw you out there drinking and partying, she was like, oh my God. This reverend was just having the best time of his entire life. I was like, no, I'm not a reverend. So, long story short, I know I'm taking over the podcast a little bit, but long story short, I had a great time.
We're here for you.
Good opportunity. That was my rose. That was my rose for the week. Okay, all right.
So what's your thorn?
Thorn. So you know what? It's interesting because I don't really have a thorn, so to speak. I am losing one of my coworkers that I was really close with. She is moving to Dallas with her husband. There's also the world in general. You know, that could always be a thorn.
That is always
it could always manifest itself as a thorn. But other than that, I'm going to accentuate the positives today. So let's just keep it in that sense.
Good. I have it's so funny because every time I come on, I'm like, oh, my life, it's great. I have so many roses, and I do. But I have for sure had a thorn this week. I don't know if you saw, I was ranting on Instagram yesterday.
Well, you know how active I am on social media, Sabrina. So.
Which is zero. Yeah, so I have my nonprofit, which started from the Puerto Rican Fest years ago. There's also all this drama with the Puerto Rican Fest that's happening. I don't even want to get into that. I'm not ready to talk about it. But my nonprofit, I'm like, I didn't even want it to become a thing. Like, I didn't even want it to become its own thing, but people really believed in it and believed in the stuff that I was doing. So I've been very much encouraged, continue with it. So I have, and I love it. I'm very grateful that we're doing it. And I had to retrain, because, I had quit my job. And when I quit teaching, I was like, maybe I can make the nonprofit and like whatever other things I have, maybe I could make those my main bread and butter. And it was just too hard to be able to do that and pay my bills. So I was like, I'm going to take it and put it to the side like it was before, and be really slow and steady with these things so I can be intentional and I can love it and not put a burden on it, because it's a labor of love, right? So that's been working, and I've been fine with it, except the problem is that we don't have massive amounts of funding. And so my thorn this week is that, we're partnering with this organization called After School Matters, which I think is like one of the dopest foundations in I have never heard of a nonprofit that does what this place does.
What do they do?
Maybe you have something in your city. Tell me if you've heard about this, but it's a nonprofit that was started by Maggie Daley, right? So Mayor Daley was the mayor of Chicago forever. His wife started this nonprofit.
There was like five Mayor Daleys, weren't there? Like a bunch of Mayor Daleys.
There was two.
It seems like it. The so-called shy. So many.
There's a lot of politics here. That's why you're on, to talk about politics. But yeah, he was mayor for a very, very long time. And so when his wife was in office when his wife was there doing her first lady type stuff, she created this nonprofit. And the nonprofit provides after-school programming to high school teens. And it's really beautiful programming that's like cooking classes, dance, piano, like all the stuff that wealthy people pay for their kids to do. It is funded by the city, and on top of that, they give the kids a stipend for participating. So then it also battles, because there's kids who are like, I have to work, I need to make money. This gives them that opportunity. So I was connected to the class to the organization because I have a classmate I had a classmate in high school who runs one of the centers. And so she would post about it all the time. And then when I had quit my job, I was like, actually, this is a really great way to still stay connected to kids. So I started teaching, and I taught a class that was a maker space. So we did like the cutting of the Cricut and doing laser printing and all the stuff that I do, but I got to do it in that space. It was awesome. And then I also got connected to an organization that like they work with community partners who will then run a class that kind of revolves around their partnership. And the dope thing is that ASM will pay the instructor, they pay for the materials, they pay all of this really great stuff. So I was like, well, I have an organization, and Nico wanted to do a class. And so he's been talking about this, wanting to like mentor younger artists. And I was like, well, if we do it through ASM, I can do all the background paperwork, I can organize everything, and then you can get paid. Because he was willing to do all of this stuff out of pocket. And I was like, if we do it through ASM, you can get paid. But the thorn, because all of this is great, right? The thorn is that they understandably have this insurance policy that needs to be in place. And they require all of their community orgs to have insurance. They do require, because I was speaking to the insurance agent, and he was like, this is next level excessive of how much they're requiring. He's like, it's understandable to say like, okay, you need to have a molestation policy because you work with kids, but they're requiring $2 million worth of coverage. So all of the coverage that they are requiring, and this like big umbrella plan on top of it, is coming out to about at least $500 a month, because we're not a official 501c3 yet. The reason we're not an official 501c3 yet is because we cannot afford the paperwork for that. That process is going to cost us about $800, which we don't have. We don't have a lot of money, right? We do stuff. One of our last projects I funded fully out of pocket. Like, I pay for this stuff, this is my rich lady philanthropy thing, right? Like,
yeah,
that's what
right.
I do. But there has to be a limit. Like, I can't pay $500 a month for insurance. The rose of that, because all of that is obviously a thorn, the rose of that is I went to the internet streets and I was like, y'all, I don't know what to do. I want this thing to exist. Maybe this is a sign it shouldn't exist. Like, I don't know. And people showed up in so many beautiful ways, they were commenting like different ideas of how we could fundraise, like monthly spot. And even someone was like, you have a podcast, like you could shout people out a podcast for a price, right? And then like and I'm like, you're right, I could definitely do that. And then someone, I can't say the name because they're going to be anonymous, but someone offered to pay for the insurance for us.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And
I didn't know you knew JB so closely. I didn't know that
Justin
Governor
Bieber?
Pritzker, Governor Pritzker, I didn't know y'all were so tight.
I wish.
Right.
I think that eventually we're gonna get to a place where we will get government and city and whatever funding, because the things we do are good. Like, they're good.
Yeah,
There's no other
absolutely.
terminology for it. We do good things in our community. I'm an educator. Like, I've been an educator for so long, and I try to integrate education into the arts all of the time. So I thought that even this ASM thing was going to be like it is a blessing, because they're paying for all the materials, they're paying the instructors, they're paying all of this great stuff. But I'm like, fuck, we don't have the insurance money. But yeah, I mean, I am blessed to have people show up for me. People believe me. That social media has been, I know you ain't be on social media, but I'm on social media. Social media has been such a blessing for me, because I share random things. I'll share the day. I'll share things that are going well. And it builds trust with me and other people, because they see the stuff that I do. And then when I have an ask, they show up. So that's my rose.
You do a phenomenal job of, one, connecting people to causes that are important. But you also do a great job of building such great interpersonal relationships with folks that they are willing to recognize that not only are you doing this because, and this is not even your goal, you're not doing this for some sort of shine, some sort of attempt to build your name to a certain point that you have a goal in the long run. You're doing this because you have a passion and concern for the people who need it the most, especially our kids.
Yeah.
I think people recognize that.
Yeah.
They like you as an individual. And all of that combined is why I think you do such a phenomenal job of bringing people to the point where they're willing to contribute and put effort, time, energy, money, resources, advice into the things that you're doing. So this is not a surprise. I'm glad we did the thorn first and then the rose second.
I had to.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had to, yeah. And it's funny because I think about it, like, some people are very ego driven, and some people are, I don't know, like, these things are ego for me, but my ego and the things that make me feel good are helping others. And, so I can't pretend that it's like all the shit I do is altruistic. It genuinely makes me feel good when a kid tells me that I'm a good teacher. So I'm just lucky that the thing that makes me feel good is connected to helping others do better.
How do you this is a question I have for you. How do you respond to that? Because
when a kid tells me I'm a good teacher?
Well, yeah, because we recently had graduation. I guess this could have been a rose too, right? We just had graduation, and I'm teaching a class. My situation right now has me where I'm teaching a class in person, then I have a virtual class. The in-person class, obviously, I built strong relationships with them because I was around them more. We could have those ambient conversations where somebody's just sitting in class and we just start talking about the Warriors versus the Celtics or whatever, right? So I went to graduation and went to speak to them afterwards, just to shake hands, just to tell them how proud I was of how far they've come. And quite a few of them said, Mr. Hankins, this is the best class. We respect you so much. Like this kind of thing. And it's very uplifting. It's very powerful to hear that. And it feels so good, right? Because we don't always hear that. It's not the kid's fault. It's just things in education feels transactional sometimes.
Yeah.
It's like you're in my class. We built this relationship, cool, but I'm moving on to the next grade or the next level.
Right.
And so I'm not necessarily going to come back all the time and have conversations with how much you helped me. For me, I kind of sit there and I'm like, thank you. I appreciate that, but I immediately want to move on to, hey, what are you doing next? Or let's talk about something else. It makes me feel uncomfortable, but I don't know how to unpack that. And I don't know if that's the case for other educators. How do you respond when a kid tells you something like that?
I said thank you, and I love it, and sometimes I write them down. Like, I need words of affirmation to feel good. Even I can know and I can feel in my heart that I'm the best educator, that I've built these strong relationships. But when a student says something to me, I'm like, thank you. And I'll give you, oh my God, this was a great example. When I did the New York Times teaching project and I had to have the kids, I wanted them to be part of my video to like, what is the word that I'm looking for? To apply. Mm-hmm. And one of the students wrote this letter because I was trying to ask them, like, tell the New York Times Learning Network how I take the real world and bring it to the classroom. That's what I wanted them to talk about, because we used a lot of like Newsella articles. We did a lot of stuff like that. And this one girl wrote this speech out about how I was such an impactful teacher because the real world is very scary and there are horrible things that happen, but I made her feel seen in a way that other teachers had not made her feel seen. I can't even remember the exact verbiage of what she said, but I was recording her. And as I was recording, I started crying because what she said was so sweet. I'll never forget that. And that I just take it and I'm like, thank you, because it fills my heart. It fills my soul. I'm nervous that like now with my new job that I'm not working directly with kids, that I'm going to start to get sad again and like not have that, that rapport with kids. But yeah, that's what that's the stuff that drives me. It really does.
It's really awesome. It's always a great feeling to hear that. It's incomparable. Like my father always said that education is the second greatest calling a person could have, with religion being the number one. We could reverse those if we wanted to or whatnot.
Sure.
I think it is a powerful thing. It's just, I wonder if other educators out there feel similarly to me. It feels as almost if I'm being thanked for something that I would do without you ever thanking me.
Yeah.
And in many ways, something I would do without being compensated as much as I am. As tough as it is, that's a longer conversation about how much we should be compensated for what we do. But it almost feels like thanking a firefighter for saving somebody out of a burning building. Yes, it was a heroic thing to do, right? But it's also what they're doing this job to do those things. Yeah. And so for me, I don't know if I just take compliments badly. I think that's just a characteristic.
You do. As your friend, you do.
I think that might be a big part of it. But ultimately, it's just something I thought about and always wanted to ask other educators how they feel and respond to those.
Yeah, that's my lifeblood. I'm gonna be really honest. I know that when I was in my most depressed state for those few years, like leading up to Harvard, I wasn't in the classroom, and I was like nannying at the time, and it was not the same type of situation as when I'm in the classroom and I'm working with kids, and the things that they say and do, and those aha moments and the conversations and like that stuff, that it's literally my lifeblood. So that's why I love tying back. That's why I love working with ASM, because it still keeps me connected to kids in some sort of way. And I feel like I'm a person that I'm learning things in the world. So I even have this podcast, right? I'm learning stuff. And when I learn it, it would be so dumb for me to just keep it here. It's pointless. Why would I keep it here and never share it? I want to turn around and I want to share it with as many people as possible so that folks know this new stuff that I'm learning. And who better to transfer that knowledge to than kids?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, 1,000%.
That's how I feel. Yeah. Well, and I hope this thing edits correctly, because I got to take that other one and then put your rose and your thorn in there.
Yeah.
The woes of podcasting.
I mean, you're an independent businesswoman. You know what I mean? You're out here. You're the Republican's dream. You know what I mean? Small business owner, out here.
No.
Trying to do it on your own. They love you. They love you.
I know, right? I'm a bootstrapping bitch. That's why they would love me very much. And I hate it. I hate that they would love me. Honestly, that's what kind of like one of the reasons why I stopped doing the educated Latina stuff, because I'm like, man, this is some exceptionalism type of stuff. Like, that's how people can perceive it. And I want to be lazy. Oh my God, Linda, we were just talking to Linda on the phone. Her favorite line from the Ali Wong special that she used to tell me at Harvard all the time was, I don't want to lean in, I want to lay down. And that's like, sometimes I'm like, I don't want to do all this stuff. I just want to be, what's the new post is, there's no longer a girl boss. It's a girl moss. You just lay on the floor and you just become one with the earth. Lots of fun phrases about being lazy.
A lot of fun phrases about being lazy,
Yeah.
But let's be honest, laziness is not in your vocabulary.
That's what my therapist used. I used to tell my therapist that. I was like, when I had my therapist, I love her, I miss her. But I used to tell her, like, I'm afraid that I'm really lazy because I don't want to do things. And she's like, the word lazy, I would never use to describe you.
Right.
But that's why my man brought me peace, because he teaches me to calm down and relax and chill. And
you gotta find that balance. Everything balanced as it should be, as my boy Thanos says.
Snap! That's it.
Find that balance.
Okay. Now we know what you want to do with the world. Okay, let's get into some topics. Hot tops, trash or treasure, current events. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So our first episode, I talked about how you are actually one of the reasons why I even know any current events, because you stay connected. You may not be on social media, but you stay connected to politics in a way that I do not. And this first one isn't even super political, but we talked about how they're recently mandating that personal finance education comes to certain schools in certain districts, right? As of right now, from what I saw, and I found this on social media, thank you very much, Ohio, Rhode Island, Florida, Iowa City, Georgia, and Michigan are all mandating personal finance education. But you said that this was happening in your district too, right?
Yes. So
what's that look like?
So I'm going to say this, and I'm not going to act as if I was the arbiter of personal finance for the Yes Prep Public School District in Houston, Texas, in which I work for. But when I was hired for my gig, and my gig is I'm a content specialist for Yes Prep Public Schools, which means I write and design content, professional development, lesson plans, daily lesson handouts for subjects in social studies, specifically AP Government, Government and Economics, African American Studies, and Mexican American Studies, which, with my deep Mexican heritage, I'm very qualified.
You a Chicano now?
Apparently, yeah, right. Just go ahead and claim,
okay.
like Rachel Dolezal. That's what I'm gonna just say I am, right?
No.
I'm gonna say I'm that person. But as is, 2/3 of my job is that aspect of things. 1/3 I get to still teach, which is the perfect marriage, the perfect dream of where I want to be right now.
Beautiful.
As is, before the course, when I received the economics course, the course was designed to be a college-ready economics course. Texas, as a state, doesn't title economics. They title it economics and free enterprise, like the benefits of free enterprise, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, economics and capitalism is awesome. Texas, how Texas titles economics, right?
Okay.
So as the course was designed in the first place, it was a micro and macroeconomics course, college ready. When I got to the district, I was given carte blanche by my supervisor to kind of think about how I wanted to restructure some of these courses to still match the standards of Texas, the TEKS is which we call them, but also make them more beneficial for our students. So I decided that half the course was going to be a personal finance course, while the other half would still do the college-ready macroeconomics stuff. So this issue is really passionate to me because personal finance is a massive barrier that our most marginalized students have little access to.
Yep.
I've gotten in arguments with friends of mine about this idea that personal finance shouldn't necessarily be taught in schools because it should be the responsibility of the parents to teach personal finance. But we know parents of color, generationally, have had poor financial records, whether it be credit score, whether it be savings, whether it be the lack of investment. How do we ask folks who have struggled through economic issues, personal finance issues on their own, maybe by no fault of their own, maybe by fault of their own, no matter what, to educate their students on the proper ways to keep your credit score at a certain level, to manage a budget in an effective way in order to make sure you're providing for your household or whatnot.
Right.
So as educators, we're the last line of defense between apathy and ignorance. It's just us. It's us, right? So why do we not put more effort into putting subjects, not just personal finance, but thinking about issues like health, thinking about healthcare in general, like thinking about those things. Why don't we put those in schools more often so that we have students and young people that can come through a mandatory course that they have to take that at least gives them some sort of base knowledge on some of the things they need to be more successful in the long run. So I'm happy to see these states do this. As a person who follows politics, I'm side-eyeing like where a lot of this is coming from, especially when you talked about some of the states you mentioned. Georgia and Michigan are very different states. I'm curious who's pushing this along. So very fascinating to hear about.
Yeah. I'd argue that trying to get kids to not, or the stance that like school shouldn't teach that is almost white supremacy in action. Yeah. Because it is, you don't want them to know these things because then they would get wealthy. Right. Mm-hmm. But when I started to learn about investing, I was like, investing is white men's gambling. Like, it's the same thing. Yeah. You know, except your return is at an average of 7-8%. Right. You know, as opposed to playing your numbers. Like, those are things that people should learn, but there are folks that don't want kids to learn that stuff.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier about this idea of not hoarding knowledge or not hoarding opportunities. But we don't live in a society and a world where everybody has that same mindset. People love to hoard their knowledge, their opportunities. There's that dog eat dog, crabs in a barrel mentality, right? Of just like, I have to be ahead because I need to be ahead. So I'm going to exclude some of this information from people who could use it to challenge my level of power or influence.
Man, and I said I'm not ready to talk about the Puerto Rican festival, but the director who was over us used that phrase, the crabs in a barrel phrase. He went on this like rant on live talking about all this stuff, but he used that phrase to describe us, and it's so true. The issues that I'm having even in my nonprofit, I'm not the first Puerto Rican to have a nonprofit, and I'm very connected to my Puerto Rican community. Like, I'm very connected to the elders in my community, right? Why do I not have the security to go to any of them, to ask them, why am I learning? Like, I went to a friend and I were talking, and I told her about how I recently applied for credit for my LLC, and I didn't know that the credit from my LLC would also go against my personal credit. I didn't know that. I literally thought the reason you had an LLC was that then the credit would go against the LLC. I know so many people who own businesses, but they're not giving us this knowledge. They're not turning around and actually helping us. And that's kind of why I'm so outspoken online, because I'm like, no, if I know something, if I'm learning something new, everybody around me should know it. I want us to be better and do better. Now, since Linda talked to me about salaries, and Linda has more or less trained me on how to do a salary negotiation. I was asking different people what their verbiage was. I put it together for my own job. I made more money with that because I was able to use that verbiage. And then other people have come to me and said, I got more money because I used the verbiage that you wrote down. That makes me feel so good. Yeah, I'm literally putting money in people's pockets. Absolutely. You know, and I'm like, why would you not want people? Why would you not want people to be better? I don't know.
That's the double truth. I think that to put a button on this, I wish we were in a position in our world, in our society, to view things that way. It's interesting that children start off at such a young age with a natural affinity towards sharing with others around them, and then for some reason we start to teach them this idea and this mindset of this should just be yours and not belong to anyone else. And
individualism,
individualism, this element, even from an elementary way of looking at it, it's such an idea of this is mine, and it should only belong to me. Is very unfortunate that we view things that way.
It is. So that's a little bit of mix of trash and treasure, right? It's nice that It's nice that this personal finance education is being taught. That's treasure. But the trash is the fact that, so many people want to keep it away from our kids.
Yep.
You also were saying something we should talk about is the January 6th hearings. I gotta be really honest. I haven't been following it as much. And I'm also very confused because I'll be on Twitter and people are talking about it. And I'm like, there's something where Fox News doesn't want to show certain things, and people are saying that it's because Fox News is like partially responsible. Will you give us a like TLDR, too long didn't read, of what's going on with these trials?
So we have, back when, after January 6th, after the insurrection, Congress, specifically the House, decided to form a committee to investigate how this happened.
Okay.
Let's keep in mind, people literally ran up on the institution of Congress. They ran up into the Capitol building and attempted to murder sitting elected Congress people for the purpose of overturning a fairly done election.
Okay.
This is the type of stuff that back in the past, when you were reading your history books or talking about historical events that took place, these are the types of things that were like horror stories. Like, oh my goodness, these people tried to overthrow the government. But because of where we are now in our hyper-partisan society, when Congress came up with the idea of having a committee, trying to form a committee, the original idea was having an independent commission review what took place. The Republicans in Congress said they didn't want that. Then the idea was to have a bipartisan committee. The Republicans, Kevin McCarthy, the majority leader of the Republicans in the House of Representatives, attempted to put members of the House from the Republican Party on the committee who are adamantly opposed to the purpose of the committee, who would actively act as disruptors in the committee to prevent them from getting the information that they needed to get. Well, your girl Nancy said, I don't want that. We're not doing that as Speaker of the House. So they decided to form the committee on their own. But two Republicans, Liz Cheney of Wyoming, and one of your guys, whose name is slipping me for a second, which is embarrassing, decided to join the committee. Two Republicans decided to join the committee. Both of them
It's a Republican from Illinois?
It's a Republican from Illinois. It really is embarrassing. I'm forgetting his name right now. These two.
I'm going to Google
I know. Disregard this episode, folks. Don't listen to me anymore.
Not an expert. Okay.
So these two get on the committee, but they are both Republicans who are anti-Trump Republicans.
Oh, okay.
They get on the committee, and so now the committee is officially bipartisan. Liz Cheney, the daughter of Dick Cheney, former Vice President of the United States, who sent us to the war in Iraq, very conservative person. She's a very conservative Congress person as well. So the committee is bipartisan. So finally, on Thursday this past week, this is the week of June 12th, so this past week, they released a lot of the information that came out regarding the investigation. While they were releasing the information, they did it in a smart way. They only had a 2-hour presentation. Normally these hearings, if you look at Watergate, if you look at Clinton's hearings dealing with his infidelity, if you look at any of these hearings that are public, more often than not, they are hours and hours and hours and hours of Congress people sitting there wanting to hear themselves talk, giving some long preamble to whatever they're trying to say, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This was very, very well done when it was a 2-hour hearing that allowed you to see video of the attack, had people testify, especially people who were on the ground when it took place. It had Donald Trump's own daughter, Ivanka, said that she didn't believe that the election had been stolen. His former Attorney General, Bill Barr, said he fought against the idea the election had been stolen. It had all this testimony or whatnot. So during that night, all the major news networks were covering what took place. Fox News decided that they weren't going to cover it because obviously Fox News leans heavily into a conservative audience and did not want to cause a disruption with their audience. So instead they put on that blowhard Tucker Carlson and had him comment on everything that took place, which of course was from a perspective of virtually supporting the insurrection and supporting Donald Trump, who also has fully come out at this point and said that this was a patriotic thing for people to do in the first place. The only reason I thought that this was important to talk about at its core is the committee seems hell-bent on pinning what happened on January 6th directly to Donald Trump himself.
Okay.
Which means legally, Donald Trump might run up against some charges that could have an impact on his prospects of running in 2024. I'll believe it when I see it. The man is Teflon. He slips through everything. It seems nothing gets him. So we'll see what happens in the long run. But what's interesting in this case is that you have a bipartisan committee that is taking part in this process. And the findings that they're releasing are some of the things we've never heard before. So who knows what might come down the road that might indict Donald Trump or some of the other supporters that helped to lead that insurrection.
Yeah. Him as a president just confuses me still. I get it, but then again, I don't. And my connection is, man, when I had to go to Disney World and he's in the Hall of Presidents, I'm like, this is stupid. I'm sorry. I can't stand looking at this man. It's
interesting because he's the first president in probably this past century plus that is completely like controversial to a point where like the Hall of Presidents might have to think about like, are we going to put Donald Trump?
Yeah.
Like are we like what are we going to do? The man's been impeached twice. If this comes out the way it looks like it's coming out, he's going to be accused of starting an insurrection to overthrow the United States government. Like he's a Confederate general or something like that. Like, what are we going to do with this dude? How are we going to teach? How are we going to teach history with this guy involved? And his name, the name of the congressperson from Illinois, Ed.M. Kinzinger. It just came to me. Now I'm less embarrassed.
I never even heard that man's name once. So that's news to me. Yeah, don't be as embarrassed. Because I was Googling and I just kept coming upon Dick Durbin. And I know that's not who. God, I know nothing about politics. It's horrible. When I was teaching, it was during Donald Trump's reign, and I was working really hard to not show bias when I was teaching because I wanted the students to not, because like he was obviously a very polarizing figure, right? And the kids would often just repeat whatever their parents would say. And where I was teaching, it was, a lot more left-leaning. So it did align with my own morals and values, but I'm not a good teacher if I just teach you to spew what somebody else said, right? My job was to teach you how to, read through facts, how to determine an author's point of view, how to, all of those understanding different people's perspectives, and then differentiate it from your own perspective. So we actually would read things that Donald Trump would write. We would read his executive orders, and I would tell the kids, like, I'm not telling you whether or not I agree with this because that doesn't matter. What matters is that you can find his perspective, and then you can find the evidence that he's using to back up his perspective, right? So we would talk about things like when he was claiming how Columbus Day was important to celebrate, and then I would provide them with a different piece of literature that talked about why Columbus Day was not good to celebrate. And so then it was like you were able to understand these different perspectives. I really relied on this website called, what's the website called? I can't remember, but it had, my goodness, I can't believe it's escaping me so hard because I can see the website. But basically you can, it's called All Sides. That's what it was called. Okay. You can go onto the website and it'll tell you, here's a topic, immigration. Here's an article about immigration from the left, from the right, and from the center. And then it had this chart where it would put all of these different news outlets on that chart. Like, is it center? Is it telling you things very factually? Or is it left-leaning, right-leaning, And so we would read all of those things because I wanted to really have the students understand his perspective, because I'm like, it's a devil you should know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's extremely valuable, and I think when we're teaching kids how to be more engaged in civics. I think it's important to validate the idea that they are coming from homes and situations that might have different belief systems than ones we might want to promote on our own. So I've absolutely having taught for 8.5 years in North Carolina, having taught here, absolutely have students whose families and they themselves have more conservative perspectives on things which don't match my political point of view. But it's also important to cultivate their ideas and allow them to think deeply about where those ideas come from, just as much as it is with my extremely liberal students. Challenging those beliefs help you to either become stronger in your own beliefs because now you understand where the side is coming from and you know how to counteract it, or it allows you to think more deeply about why somebody believes what they do. And I am a big proponent on this idea of treating people like human beings. And if you can understand where another side, right, that's crazy. Like, what are we talking about? I'm very big on this idea because if you understand where somebody's belief system comes from, deeply from researched, backed ideas that they might have, then you respect them more as a human being for having an idea as opposed to just looking at them and say, they're different from me, they're wrong, that means they're a bad person.
Right.
I've really struggled with some things as of late because I've grown up, especially growing up in North Carolina, grew up with a lot of friends who are conservative people who are Republicans and voted Republican quite a bit. And a lot of those folks I'm still tight with and still really, really good friends with. But Donald Trump really threw a wrench in some of our debates and our discussions.
Right.
Because I truly believe that a lot of my conservative friends are, a lot of them, I'm not going to say all of them because there's some that I'm even nervous to jump into the conversation about Donald Trump about because I just don't want to get deep into a discussion that might lead to a parting of the ways, if you will.
Yeah.
But what's concerned me is the idea right now that I think a lot of conservatives uphold is how do we win? How do we win elections? You cannot win an election in this country right now, in most states, without pledging some fealty to Donald Trump, or at least to Trumpism.
Right.
You have to have some of that passion and that fire because the most excited people in that base, in that group, are hardcore Trump supporters who almost worship the man to a fault, right? Where whatever he says and whatever he does, they're behind him, right?
Yeah.
So those folks are the most passionate people. They're the ones who are voting in these elections. They're the ones who are actively protesting. They're the ones who are sending money. So if you're a Republican running for office right now, in most states and in most districts, you have to have some sort of connection to Trumpism, or you have to at least hint at your appreciation for Trumpism. And because of that, I think there's some conservative people that I've known and conservative politicians that I've read about over the years, over the decades, who have never been Trumpy politicians, have never done the hardcore rhetoric about immigration, never been so callous when it comes to lives of people of color. Like,
you say colored?
I know I was ready colored people, which is gotta protect her. I know. See, this will get that rating that when you post it, it's like, oh,
you're problematic.
It's a problematic rating. I feel like if anybody can say colored people, I can say colored people. Anyways, but as is, I think in a lot of ways, because of that, what's scary is people I've disagreed with to the fullest on almost all issues have become people that I just didn't disagree with and thought were, they're good people. They just have different views than I have. Right. They have embraced an insurrectionist, person who has displayed racism, a person who's displayed ableism, a person who has displayed homophobia. You've embraced this person because you want to win, not because that's in your values and what you believe in truly, but you know in order to win an election, this is what you need to have on your side. So that is the part that's scary to me in the short term.
And that's what I was trying trying to understand when even having my students read his stuff, I would read his stuff because like I wanted to get it. I also tried to watch the film Hillbilly Elegy because I heard that that was really good to understand Trumpism.
Yeah.
And I don't get it. I actually couldn't even get through the film. Maybe I should read the book. I don't know. But I was like,
I would not read the book. Don't give any money. J.D. Vance, the author of Hillbilly Elegy, is currently the Republican nominee for Senate in the state of Ohio, and he's a Trump. He's a guy. He fits the example perfectly of a anti-Trump conservative Republican for so long, but then when it was time to run for office, he embraced Trumpism fully, got the endorsement from Donald Trump, and is now probably going to be the next senator from the state of Ohio, considering Ohio typically votes Republican in.
See, that's why I have you in my life. Thank you for that knowledge. Because I was like, I want to understand. I want to be able to see other people's perspective, and I want to understand things so that you can have certain conversations with people, like especially if they have an opposing view. But I was like, you just whining. Like I was like 10 seconds into the film, he's at this like dinner table with people and he's like, my mom's poor. We're all poor. Like what? I couldn't get through it. I couldn't. But now, yeah, I did hear that he was running for office and was a piece of caca. So we won't support that man. I guess I have this personal goal to say the word caca on every podcast. So I don't know. Anyway.
No, you could change the name to It's All That Word if you wanted to.
It's all caca, yeah, for sure. Our last little political thing we're going to talk about, you also shared this with me. This should just be called James's political section.
No.
We talked a little bit about the gun laws that are potentially being put into place and being passed. And I can't understand, I guess I don't want to say I can't understand, but I'm like, our gun laws are stupid. They are literally killing people. And the guns are more important than the lives. It's driving me nuts. What are your thoughts, James? What are your thoughts on gun laws?
So literally this morning, there was a tentative agreement between members of the United States Senate on both the Democrat and Republican side to pass a national gun law that is a watered down version of probably what we need the most. But it is a sign that the terrible event that happened at Uvalde, what happened in Buffalo, what has continued to happen over the past few weeks, has moved a lot of members of the Republican Party specifically to support some sort of gun legislation. So some parts about that. Literally, I say this morning. I know this will come out later on this week. So this is June 12th, Sunday, June 12th, right? The things that will happen in that piece of legislation is they're going to implement red flag laws. And these laws are designed to allow authorities to keep guns away from people if a judge finds that this person could represent a potential threat to themselves or others. It also extends federal background checks for gun buyers under 21, meaning that before, if you were a juvenile and you got in trouble for, let's say, violence at school or something like that, and you end up going to juvenile court because of it, right? That stuff, by the time you get to the age of, by the time you get to a certain age, that stuff would be pretty much not off your record as far as a background check would be concerned, right? Now, people who are under the age of 21, they will do a mandatory search of your juvenile records at that particular point in time. So the hope and belief is that if somebody had committed violence at one point in time in school and they displayed, potential that they might do this in the future, that now we can see that record from their youth and be able to take that and say, okay, this person cannot buy a gun. It's also going to do some things that I think we're going to interest some of the folks here who think about education quite a bit, which is, the focus of the podcast. One of the things is it is going to expand mental health funding, which I'm not quite sure. I haven't done a deep dive as to what that really means at the end of the day. Right. But the other aspect was to extend school security offerings. Again, I haven't done a deep dive to know exactly what that looks like. I don't even know if we know yet what that looks like because the legislation hasn't been technically finalized or anything like this. It's just an agreement that is on paper, people saying we agree that we're going to focus on this. Before we get to the school security part, what this does fall short of is it does not ban assault weapons, which is what President Biden and a lot of anti-gun activists have been pushing for. It doesn't put restriction on high-capacity magazines, meaning buying parts to your gun that can hold a lot of bullets, basically.
Right.
And it doesn't provide the universal background checks that really is something that would have prevented at least one of the killings. When someone, the situation in, I can't remember the city, where the guy had gone to his doctor's office and got angry with his doctor, literally went out, bought a gun, and came back and killed some folks. This would have prevented that from happening in the first place. So while this is a step in the right direction, and some of these things will be helpful, I believe, in preventing gun violence, we've still not gone far enough to really handle America's gun problem. And so this gets to that point about school security. What was your experience? I know I'm not supposed to want to ask you questions, my bad, but what was your experience?
Oh, no, take over. This is your podcast. No, go
ahead. What was your experience with resource officers and their presence, and how did your students feel about that? Because I have very, very strong feelings related to how I think that should look in the long run. But what was your experience?
Yeah. We didn't have any SROs at any of the schools that I was at. We had security guards. Actually, the school that I taught at the South Side, one of the security guards was like off-duty cop, I think. Plain clothes, like it was, she wasn't doing anything that seemed threatening. So I don't know that. And sometimes they would bring on-duty cops in to shake up the kids. It never worked. No child was like, well, no, I feel better. And no, I'm going to change my whole behavior because I saw that one cop lady coming. Nobody did any of that. So yeah, I didn't have any crazy experiences with that. Even in high school, we had security, we had metal detectors, but it was never to the extent that was like, it never... I guess I should say that anytime there was security, whether it was in the elementary school or in high school, it always felt like their presence was about the students. It wasn't to protect us from an outside threat. It was never about that. And I know that that's been a big topic of conversation, because when you do have police inside the school, it ends up being that they are over-policing the children. There was... God, I can't remember what high school it was, but there was a high school here in Chicago, and there was video that came out of a school resource officer dragging a girl down the stairs in her high school because he was like fighting with her. There was no outside threat. You're literally there, doing that to the kids. So that's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah.
I don't want to be too polarizing.
I definitely think the idea of school resource officers being there to protect against outside threats makes a lot of sense to me, even though we've seen that more often than not, school resources officers have not been able to prevent gun violence. If somebody wants to find a way to get into a school and commit that level of violence, they will find a way to do it. The concern I also have, and I echo what you just said, is the over-policing of students. Teachers not being able to handle or manage their classroom in such a way to de-escalate violent situation in the classroom, a fight that happens in the classroom, and just immediately calling a resource officer to come in and sometimes handcuff kids and walk them through hallways where now they are stigmatized as a criminal just by the visual of them walking through the hallway with handcuffs on. Yeah. I think we have to find a way to protect our schools, and I think there's a purpose to having someone at the school who can prevent violence from happening upon students. But I think we have to find a way to not integrate school resources officers into our disciplinary practices. At the end of the day, if a student brings a weapon to school, that's a completely different scenario. There's a fight in the hallway. Break it up. Just handle it. Like it's like teachers have been doing that for decades. Just break up the fight and handle it.
I got my thumb broken like that one year.
See
and then the two girls ended up being friends, and I was so mad. I was personally offended.
That's how it happens. Every person I've fought in my life has become a friend of mine. And I don't know what that says about my level.
At the expense of your teacher's thumb?
Well, at least you didn't end up on World Star. You could have been on World Star. That's why I never broke up fights. I never broke up a single fight because I was not going to be the short teacher that got knocked out. I'm short with glasses. I wasn't going to be knocked out on World Star.
With glasses?
You wouldn't catch me.
You're absolutely right. That's the last fight that I broke up because I was like, no, this is I can't put myself in this. I can't be. I had a splint on my thumb, and then the two of them are walking down the hallway holding hands, being best friends. See? Yeah. Never again.
It's a problem. It's a problem.
Yeah.
Last thing I'll say about the gun situation is, just for FYI, and I know people know this, but it takes 60 votes in the Senate to pass anything. The House has passed like 85 gun laws that have been like some of the most progressive gun laws that have ever existed. But it doesn't matter because the Senate has to have a version that can pass the Senate as well before it goes to the president to sign. But you need 60 votes in the Senate to pass any piece of legislation. Otherwise, they can enter into a process called a filibuster, which prevents legislation from being passed.
That's when they yap for a really long time on the.
Well, that used to be what they did. That used to be what they did. In the past, it used to be a process where you had to stand up and speak for as long as you wanted to. You could you could speak about whatever. You could read the phone book, which people have done before. You could not go to the bathroom. There's a story about a senator who was giving a filibuster, really needed to pee, and of course it was all men at that time, all white men at the time. But anyways, he was standing up, he needed to pee, so there was a little closet that he was beside, and he had an aide bring a bucket to the closet.
Oh, God.
He put his foot in, he did his business in the bucket, and still kept his filibuster going. Now, if we were still doing filibusters that way, we'd have less filibusters because people can't do that for an extended amount of time.
Sure.
You can pass that on to other members. It doesn't have to just be one person. But anyways, people just can't do that for an extended amount of time. Now the threat of the filibuster is enough to prevent something from being passed. So 60 votes are needed to overcome the filibuster. It's called cloture. When you have a Senate that's divided between 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans, you're almost never going to get 60 votes. So we'll see if this legislation can get 10 Republicans on board to pass. They believe they might be able to, but this was the exact same situation when Sandy Hook happened and during Obama's administration, and we had a strong push from the Senate, and we had a lot of Republicans willing to pass a stronger gun law, but not enough. It wasn't 60. In fact, 4 Democrats voted against it as well because they were scared about their re-election chances, and they were running in conservative states. So they voted against gun legislation. But guess what happened? They all lost anyways. So they should have done the right thing. Right. They should have done the right thing. That's why you always do the right thing, like Spike Lee said, and do the right thing.
Like Spike Lee
always do the right thing. Yeah.
Wow. We have a word of wisdom from Spike Lee. That's fantastic. Thank you. Right. Yeah, I didn't know that about how many votes need to pass. So that's good information to know. See, again, this is why I keep you around the politics. I have no idea what is happening in the rest of the world. I'm like, can't we all just get along and be friends? No, we can't.
We can't.
But this is now I want to talk about your past and what brings you to this, fantastic world of education and ed policy. You grew up with this type of background. Your father was an NAACP president. Can you talk about that? What was that like?
So my father was is still alive, 76 years young. He was heavily involved in the civil rights movement growing up. Was somebody who advocated in our hometown of Wilmington, North Carolina, on the coast of North Carolina, for civil rights, and was a strong proponent of organizations like the NAACP. Matter of fact, the reason why I'm a black Catholic and his side of the family, a lot of those folks are black Catholics, is because during the civil rights movement, the Catholic Church was one of the only religious organizations in the city who supported civil rights. Even some of the black churches refused to be active in the civil rights movement due to fear of retaliation or whatnot. And so sense. My family became, that side of my family became Catholic. So he was heavily involved. He ended up becoming president of NAACP for the county, not by his choice. My father's not a politician. He's not somebody who campaigns or really advocates for himself as much as he probably should or could, but he became NAACP president. And so when I was growing up, my mother was really heavily focused on making sure my academics were in order. She is an accountant, a CPA. She's been very focused on making sure that I was doing the things that I needed to do in order to be successful in school. Whereas my dad was really big on, hey, read this autobiography of Malcolm X 3 times in your life and tell me about it each time that you've read it at different ages. Or read these biographies of Hubert Humphrey, the former vice president of the United States under Lyndon Johnson, because he has an intricate connection to the civil rights movement. So I was heavily involved and active in political thought and thought about civil rights. And this is especially during a time in the 90s where we were really, really lax when it came to fighting for the rights of marginalized people. We got really comfortable in the 90s. It's a conversation for another time. But my father got me to that point or whatnot. And him being an educator, my mother being an educator for a little while as well, was kind of a North Star to kind of look at when I was growing up.
We talked about how there was something I had learned about how families, especially in maybe it was Wilmington, just basically that you were saying how your family has land that was given to you as a form of like some sort of small reparations, right? From like way back when. What was that story?
So my mother's side of the family lived out in the country on farmland. Okay. So they were able to, so we weren't necessarily given any land through any sort of like form of reparation or whatnot. Okay. My family was just very, very, both sides of the family were very, very cognizant that land was going to be valuable in the future. So my mother's side of the family, their farmland, they expanded and started to buy land over time. And there's literally plots out there where members of my family own those plots where they could build their own house, or now with so much development going on in that side of the country or that side of the state, possibly sell it all for, a nice bit of change,
Right, yeah.
So there was a big, definitely a movement about the importance of buying land. We owned a house at one point in time. I wish this was during the era of Airbnb. I didn't exist, but we owned a house that was supposed to be my house at one point in time that we rented out to folks. And my father only wanted to do through Section 8 housing. So he wanted to provide a cheap place home for families who couldn't normally afford homes.
Love that.
We had the house for a while. There was a lot of damage to it over the years, and eventually we had to end up selling that off to help take care of some medical bills and things like that in the long run. But that was kind of the basis of where all that came from.
Oh, okay. I don't know why it was like, I thought I remember hearing some sort of like podcast or reading something that it was like land was given to folks that they used to work on, and then they got it, and then they kept it in the family for a really long time. And I thought you had said that your family was connected to something like that.
I wish
that's not the case.
I would love some reparations now. If somebody
that's
wants
what
to
I
come
thought.
down and give me some y'all want to give me some land, I promise you I'll take care of it.
Yeah.
I'll do whatever I think to do to keep it. Yeah, give me some land, folks. Come on, white. Come on, Biden. Come on, Biden. Let's do these reparations. You'll get reelected. I promise you. 2024, you do some reparations for us.
You gotta pick reparations or student loans. You can't have both.
Give me reparations. Give me reparations.
Okay.
I don't want. Okay. We had talked with the student loan thing. Whole nother thing.
Yeah, I'll let you have that. But all of that background, like your family knew so much about their history. Your dad was a part of civil rights, and that really informed you and the work that you ended up doing. Becoming now, you really focus on ed policy. But what brought you into that? Is it because of your father's background, or why'd you take it in that direction?
Well, I think if like reflecting on it now, it definitely is like the ultimate combination of like everything I grew up doing, with my mother focusing on the academic piece of it, my father focusing on the activist political efficacy piece of it. I think all that started to come together. I mean, ultimately, I wanted to be an actor, writer, director is what I wanted to be growing up. That was my ultimate goal at the end of the day. But I think that the ed policy eventually came into place when I started to teach. I enjoyed every minute of it, which is why I did my gig right now, because I get to teach still. I enjoyed every aspect of being in the classroom, but it felt like on the micro level, on the school level, on the district level, there were some tweaks that could be made. I felt like when it comes to things like personal financial literacy, I felt like that was something we should be doing.
Yeah.
When it came to this idea of looking at how we suspend students and whether we should suspend students and what does that process look like? Well, how much more valuable is in-school suspension where students are still in school, still can get their academics in versus sending students home and just letting them sit. Like, these are little policy tweaks that I felt like could be made. What could we do to provide overtime for teachers? Can we apply for a grant? Can we find some money somewhere to experiment with the idea of providing overtime for teachers? Because if we can't pay them out of pocket for their monthly or biweekly or however they get paid on a salary level, what kind of bonuses can we provide for teachers to supplement their work? So that kind of got me in the mood of I need to dive deeper into policy, and especially because I've always had a strong affinity towards politics. All of that kind of added itself together to bring me to the ed policy goal.
So what did you learn? Because you studied ed policy at Harvard. What are things that you learned there that you take into your work now?
One of the things I would say to people who are looking to apply to grad school programs especially master's programs. Masters are they're a bit of a scam. Let's be honest. They're a bit of a scam. We put a lot of money into getting a master's, and it does look good on the resume or things like that. But it doesn't really give us any sort of official, especially in education. A lot of us were not going to get paid more for the masters that we're going to get. So,
damn, did you read my notes? Because this is one of the Q&A questions.
Really? Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Hold off on that.
So stop talking. Save it. No.
Save it. Spoiler alert. No, I think that what I learned while I was at school were a lot of skills. One of them was the skill to be able to take data and be able to interpret it in a certain way. So my management class was really good about looking at research and data and being able to break that down. That got me the job I got today. I needed that on my resume. The other area was Dr. Karen Mapp talked a lot about ghosts in schools. And we kind of talked a little bit about, the school resource officer and the trauma that students can go through when they are criminalized by being, arrested or being even just, detained by a resource officer. And that prevents them from having positive views of schools when they are raising their children, making them not want to participate and be active in the school community because they have those ghosts that they are reminded of every time they walk in the door. And that philosophy was very powerful for me to carry forward. It's something I still talk about and still give Dr. Mapp credit for. I'm not taking credit for it, Dr. Mapp. You happen to hear this. I still give you credit for it every time.
I would be honored if she listened to my podcast.
Oh, yeah, that means you would have to get her on here. Absolutely.
Oh, my God.
So those things, testing, I have a very counterintuitive view of testing based off of what I think some people would think. I'm not opposed to multiple choice standardized testing. I'm opposed. Let me finish. I'm not opposed to it. I'm opposed to it when it is not culturally relevant. I'm opposed to it when it is a end-all be-all of whether you pass a course or whether you move on to the next grade. I am all for it in the sense of collecting data as long as the inference of what we're testing students on. If we're testing students on math skills, and Dr. Dan Kortz was the one who put this in front of me. If we are testing students on math skills, give them a math test. Don't add reading to the math test.
Right.
Give them questions that have just the formulas that they have to complete. Because if you ask them to read now, you are not accurately gauging where they know math. Now you're gauging whether or not they know reading. And unless you're testing both, don't have both of them involved in the test. So those are the little things I picked up. My policy classes were a bit of an echo chamber sometimes because I think those of us that were there, HGSE, all leaned in a certain direction, and those who didn't really speak up much. So although those were great incubators for great ideas and innovations, I think I learned more from my skill-based courses than I did from my academic courses, if that makes sense.
Do you have faith in politicians to move and progress our country in the way that it needs to be progressed?
I have faith that a lot of politicians got into their position because they wanted to do some good somewhere, whether or not I agree with what their good is.
Okay.
I think a lot of politicians have based why they do what they do for a good thing. But I think politicians sometimes have the same problems that teachers do. Yeah. A lot of educators got into education because they wanted to help kids, and then they stay in it because it gives them a paycheck and a steady job over time.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
And so I don't have faith that our system as it's designed, I don't have faith our democracy has much longer to survive. Ooh. I think the ideal of what democracy was, maybe it was falsely upheld, and there was a lot of smoke and mirrors about keeping democratic institutions lifted, and politicians behaved in a certain way in order to keep that kind of insinuation of what democracy is alive. But at least they faked it, right? At least they faked it for long enough. I think our democracy is in a lot of trouble. We can't acknowledge truth as truth when I can say something that is unequivocally true and have numbers to back it up and look somebody in the eye and say, this is true. And they can look at me and say, no, it's not. And they get as much support and follows as I might get by saying the actual truth. Then how can our democracy survive? So no, I don't have a lot of faith that our politicians, even the ones with good intentions, are in a position to be able to really adequately change our country on a national level. I think on a local level, that is where I think our push for activism, our push for more progressive politicians that can get things done, practically progressive politicians, I should say, that can get things done. I think that's where the power really lies. Those people are less corruptible because there's not as much money involved in what they do.
Have you heard of the city of Chicago?
I've heard rumors of the so-called Chi. I've heard rumors of the so-called Chi.
Do you know what an alderman is?
Yeah, I'm familiar.
They are the most corrupt people I have ever. I get that. Some of them.
Yeah, I get
most of them. And very local.
I think the thing too though is and this is no shade to the so-called Chi and
it's okay,
Big
shade
Apple
us. We deserve it.
LA and even Houston or any of these other places. I don't think the real change. I don't think the bud of change that needs to happen is going to happen in big cities. It's going to be small towns, growing cities that have people who are very closely connected to the ones that are controlling their government, whether it be the mayor, whether it be the city council, school boards, etc. I believe those laboratories of innovation, those places that can say, we're going to do something different. We're going to try this because it's best for kids, it's best for people, it's best for the marginalized communities in our community. We are going to do this and try this. And if they do it successfully, then the ideas and the mindset, maybe it can spread to more moderately sized cities and towns.
Nice, yeah.
And maybe it's to a point where maybe the future in our democracy is not in Texas and Illinois and New York and California. Maybe it's in small towns in South Carolina. Maybe it's in, small areas out in the Midwest in places like Nebraska or whatever.
Nebraska came to mind for me too. Wow. The future is in Nebraska. You heard it here
first. The future is in Nebraska as well as the corn. So you will definitely be able to get what you need out of Nebraska. But maybe I'm just spitballing. I'm not some arbiter of all the knowledge. You know what I mean? It's just the more I think about it, I just don't think our democracy has a place to survive if we don't have strong, like-minded people being able to innovate change. And I don't think that can happen on a national level at this point because truth is no longer truth.
Truth isn't truth, yeah. I feel like maybe my background of being from Chicago is the reason that I have such a negative association with politics, because I very much grew up knowing a lot of aldermen are corrupt. And I knew that from a distance. But then now, because of my involvement with, especially the Puerto Rican festival, like I talked about, I got to see it up close. Yeah. And it really made me sad and disillusioned a little bit. Like I got involved with certain things, being like, yeah, I can make change, I can do great things. And then learning that's actually not the case here. You have to have some sort of political alignment. And if you don't, you're sort of screwed. And I never wanted to be involved. None of my stuff had to do with policy and change. It always had to do with art and education. Like, I'm the hippie kid in the side trying to be like, let's all just get along and love each other. And, you know, people are trying to do numbers and percentages and cuts and like do this. And it just didn't, it really made me disappointed. This is why, like, I do like hearing things from you, because you explain things in such a way that I don't end up feeling as like sad or dumb or down. You know what I mean?
Well, no, but I also extremely value your perspective, because I've never lived in a city like Chicago, right? Like, Wilmington, North Carolina is a small town off the coast. It is almost very apolitical. It's all about real estate when it comes down to it, and tourism. That's its thing. Raleigh is a very politically active city where I lived, where I went to undergrad and taught for most of my life, but not the size of Chicago. Houston, I'm here now. Houston is just this monolith that I don't understand yet, even though I've been here for 4 years at this point. The pandemic made it so I was inside my house most of the time.
Yeah.
So I always value your perspective, because you've seen it not just by growing up in it, but also, like you said, being so up close to it, that this is a perspective that I don't see on the surface and stuff. So it's always cool to hear what you say.
I just recently had a conversation with someone. She's an older Puerto Rican woman who was telling you, we were just like talking about politics and stuff like that, or like people in office. And I was saying that I feel like I've kind of put my hand on the stove a little bit, and that it makes me not want to be in any sort of politics in the city of Chicago. But there are politicians who are here. This isn't to say all bad things. Like, I brought up one of the senators, and I hate to put her on a pedestal. She's a Puerto Rican senator from Chicago, but she makes it really hard to not put her on a pedestal, because she's so great, and she like passes all of these great bills, and you know, and has an education mindset too. And like, you obviously know how I feel about AOC. Like, I definitely see myself in that woman. So those are politicians that I love very much, but I can't see myself getting into this world of it. I know you want to eventually, right? Like, you want to get deeper into it. I just feel like people would make me really sad. There's no better way to put it, you know?
I tell you, I've been very disillusioned by politics as of late, just because I've mentioned before, I have some really good friends that we can argue and debate politics all the time with one another. Love those guys. Shout out Dave Fox. If you listen to this, he's going to have a whole list of complaints about some things that I said that were progressive or liberal. But we'll debate about it. We'll laugh about it. We'll joke about it. And we'll, you know, at the end of the day, we're still friends. But the idea that nowadays you can't be friends with somebody who has different political views than you do makes me less comfortable with politics. Also, just the level of corruption, the level of, and it goes back to what we kept saying, truth is no longer truth anymore. If I can't look at somebody in the eye and tell them something that is factual, and them say, well, I might not like that, but it is what it is, I'm still going to vote against you. Instead, somebody says, oh, that's not true at all, you're a liar. Yeah. This doesn't, like, I don't know. I still love politics. I'm still interested in what it can do for people. It's just, what do I need to sacrifice as a human being, as the person I am? Can I be a politician in my own voice? And I don't know if I can be a politician in my own voice and be true to myself in the long run. So that's a question I might have. So I get it. I feel you. I hear you. I understand.
That's real, and that's beautiful. So are you trying to get involved in any sort of political things within Houston? And also, why Houston? Why are you there?
First and foremost, Houston, one of the most underrated cities, I think, in the country. Okay. For all my black folks, shout out on the East Coast who, you know, lived in North Carolina and Virginia and Tennessee and, you know, South Carolina, all these places. And you always like, oh, we got to go to Atlanta. We got to go to Black Gotham. Got to go to Atlanta. You love Atlanta. Y'all need to take the little flight, you know, hour further and check out Houston, Texas. It's got all the black stuff we blacks love out here in Houston, but better food.
Is this an additional chapter to your book that you wrote with your dad?
Well,
the title that I can't say, you gotta say the title.
What We Blacks Need to Do Part 2. It's the sequel to
the
original. The sequel to the original What We Blacks Need to Do. I can't take credit as a co-writer. It's my fault. I just edited the book heavily on behalf of my dad. Okay. So I was involved in the process, but it is in James Hankins the first, the original. It's in his voice at that point. So Houston was just a place where one, the job opportunity was perfect. I mentioned before what I do. I think it's perfect. It fit exactly what I want to do. Also, it's a place where there's no state tax. That's really cool because Texas.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, that's a really cool aspect of things. But I love the diversity of Houston. I love the diversity of Houston, the options of things, not just to do, but the types of people. That's what I was so enamored about at Harvard when we went. I had never been anywhere else. And it would pretty much living in North Carolina, black folks, white folks, and a smattering of other folks, right? Harvard opened up this door where I was meeting people from all over the country, all over the world, and like not just race, but sexual orientation, like all these things I was becoming friends with and meeting people from different backgrounds that just exploded my mind of different ideas and thought processes and all those things. I was like, I can't live in a place that's not as diverse as that again. So Houston became that option. And as far as any political involvement, this is a city where things are very entrenched with their political ideas and who's next and who's in line to do this, that, and the third. I am very, very interested in the educational policy aspect, which is, no surprise, but I'm interested in the educational policy aspect of things. My organization, the school district that I work for, does have like a political arm. And so maybe down the road, I might take a little taste and see what that looks like, at that point. Okay. But right now, I love what I'm doing. I'm trying to buy a house, so that's a focus as well. Wow. So I'm just continue to work for the kids and write this curriculum and enjoy that and find a house, find a wife, and then figure it out from there. We'll see where it goes.
Man, that dating life. That's what Linda said on the first podcast was that she's like, I don't talk about James about any politics. We only talk about dating.
Linda and I always end up going back and forth on the perspectives of what it feels like to be single at our age and what different experiences we have because of it, for sure.
Right, man, what a life. I almost want to get into it, but I don't. Because now I wanted to ask you about your time at Harvard. And then, of course, because I know you, my brain went to your dating life at Harvard. We don't got to talk about that. But that's why I paused, because I was thinking about that. But what attracted you to apply to Harvard in the first place?
I initially knew that I wanted to ed policy. I had a friend, a mentor of mine from undergrad who had happened to go to HGSE. He had a great experience. I also noted that his grades and his resume from undergrad weren't radically different from mine. Okay. So that was a bit of he was able to go and get in. And maybe I don't have to have had a 4.9 GPA, in order to apply, right? So I was getting kind of tired of the day-to-day teaching life. It was getting to be exhausting. I had a really rough year. Was probably the most rough year I had in education for a little while. I was connecting with my students personally, but I didn't feel like I was getting through to them academically. Okay. I was dealing with just stuff in school, like just personal life stuff that just all kinds of just kind of messed me up a little bit. And so I decided to apply to HGSE. And I applied to HGSE. It was the only university I applied to at the time. And I was like, okay, we'll see what happens. And then I get that letter back, and it's like, nah, man, you're good. Yeah. You could stay where you're at, Yeah. So that was really tough for that time. That was really a big blow to me at that point. And so the next year I decided to apply again, knowing that HGSE was kind of my goal, but I also, Penn had a program. Okay. George Washington had a program. Wake Forest down the street from me, or a few hours up the road from me, had a program as well.
Is that where J. Cole lives behind?
J. Cole lives in J. Cole is from what we would call the fake 910 area code from Fayetteville. He says Fayette-Nam all the time. I'm from the real 910, Wilmington, North Carolina. But shout out to a lot of family from Fayetteville. Shout out to J. Cole too. It's good to know that he's doing well. I think he's doing well. I don't know. I don't follow him. But
man, I've been he's driving me nuts because he was fighting with a Chicago rapper.
Oh, woman. What about? Yeah, what was it?
He wrote a diss track about No Name, and it was like really horrible. And I was like, man, but you're like literally my favorite rapper. So it made me sad. Yeah. But men just constantly be disappointed. Go ahead. Keep going.
never meet your heroes. This is why I don't have any role models. They will always disappoint you.
They will. Yes.
They will always disappoint you. So, ended up applying again. Did not think I was going to get in again. I happened to get in, and the other programs I got into those as well. In fact, I got into George Washington first, and I ended up telling my homeboy Greg, who, shout out Greg Jackson. He is the CEO of a gun violence prevention organization. Wow. He's somebody who's been a victim of gun violence before, and he's a strong proponent of that. So Greg Jackson, check him out. I bet he's got a blue check somewhere, so you can probably see him at that point.
Okay.
But anyways, I was going to live with him for a little while. We'd had a conversation about that. And then I'd gotten the HGSE note, and that was that. I'd never been on campus before. It was a really cool experience to be able to get in and head that way.
Yeah. One of the things that I felt about Harvard, I really was nervous when I was going there that it was going to be me surrounded by a bunch of white people. And I really expected to go there and have my head down and learn and listen. And I didn't, it exceeded my expectations because, I don't know if you went to the student of color or not the student, there was like a student of color, something at the open house. I'll never forget this. My grandma came, my dad, and she turns to my dad and she's like, wow, there's so much diversity here. And I was like, we're at the student of color. Like, of course there's a lot of diversity. But that set me up that like when we were there, all of us still stayed connected and made the experience very beautiful, and it made it so well-rounded that we got to hear so many different perspectives and voices, and it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I really thought it was just going to be me surrounded by a bunch of white people, and it wasn't. Like, we had everybody there, and it was a really fantastic experience in that way.
Yeah, did not do the open house. The first time I got on campus was the first time when school was about to start. And I remember the first thing I did was I reached out to all of there was some education policy Facebook group that people started, and I reached out to a bunch of people and I was like, hey, let's go to a bar and just start to get to know each other and stuff and have drinks and stuff. And I remember doing that. And a lot of those people in that group, I ended up becoming really good friends with over time. Yeah. And I remember there was like Jacqueline and Soraya there or whatnot. And it was really cool to have them in the place as well. And so it wasn't until we had that orientation for students of color. And I remember specifically, I didn't really know anybody in that room at that point because I had just not met anybody at that point that was of color, so to speak. Yeah. And I remember sitting beside Veronica and having a conversation with Veronica and just hearing her story and how young she was. I was like, it's a child. Like, I'm the oldest man here.
We were definitely on the older end of all of the friends that we had there. Yeah.
We really were. Yeah. But no, I don't think I would have survived the same way without y'all, I think we just had a really strong community of people of color. And granted, it was obviously some drama and, what are you going to do when you put people together? I never had any drama, just FYI for the folks out there.
No, not me neither.
All right. Truth is truth, right? That's what we say. That's what we try to say.
It's your truth.
Your truth. Is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah.
But as is, like, I just think that was a survival mechanism. That was a survival mode to have all those people up there. And granted, we weren't the majority. We weren't, it wasn't as if we dominated the campus, but it was reliable. It was trustworthy.
Yes.
I could hold my faith.
It was safe.
Yeah, it was safe. Yep.
Yeah. I don't even use the word survive. I think I thought that I was going to survive, and instead we thrived. Like, we literally were thriving together. We learned a lot. I do wish that it's education. So I do wish that there were more men, because it was very female dominated. And so we missed a lot of perspective in that way. Also, dating was hard, right? We talked about that. Because it was like a girls' club. Dating hard for us, not for you. It was a numbers game.
I think the issue was always going to be with the small number of men there, and especially people who were men who dated women and women who dated men in that sense, right?
Yeah, the heteros.
Yes, right. I think I think there was something to be said about, because the small number, there was way too much people. Everybody knew everybody's business unless you kept your business really, really on the down low or whatnot. And so I think there was it was complicated for some folks. I definitely
even beyond the dating, I think what I mean is, like, I wish that more men were there, because I wish that more men cared about education. I think that your perspective is really valuable. And also just being like a role model for young men of color. I think I didn't realize this until I got to Harvard, and I was doing a lot of research, that the number one career for Latinas is teaching.
Oh, wow.
So it's like number one is teaching, and then the second is nursing.
Okay.
When you're educated, right? So that is why the things that I ended up creating, I think, ended up resonating with so many Latinas, because so many of us are teachers. And so there is a lot of mirrors, more or less, like, of us in the classroom to our students. When I was teaching, I know that I connected to my Latina students because they saw themselves in me, right? I connected to the girls in general because they saw themselves in me. The Latino boys saw themselves in me in a different way too. I didn't connect in a way that I wish I could with the black boys. I just they didn't see much of themselves in me at all. And I wish that they had more of themselves in our buildings, you know?
Yeah. I think the thing that keeps coming along with, I think, black men especially, is, I think in a lot of ways, a lot of communities, a lot of people within the community view teaching as a crutch for black men, as a bit of a failure. I've heard black men at times talk about how, like, classrooms are not the place for us. We need to be doing something greater than that. And it's kind of bizarre to think about that, because while I get the sentiment of trying to better yourself, better your community through other avenues, this should be a strong calling for black boys. Demographically, through data, we can see that black boys struggle at a higher rate than almost any other demographic that exists. And not to say that having a bunch of black men teachers is some panacea and that the problem's solved because we got black men in the school, but the idea of pressing upon a community, like you said, that can see themselves in us and build those types of connections with us, that can add another mentor, another voice of reason in their life that can help push them on a better path than they might consider, is so important. But it really is viewed as, why are you a teacher? There's a big push, I think, amongst black males, especially, of, you've got to make money, you got to stack cash or whatnot, you got to be able to get rich. And I think a lot of that is rooted in this idea of like, even like patriarchal mindsets of, I've got to take care of my family, so I've got to make a ton of money in order to take care of my family. Or just this mindset of, my worth is built within how much money I make. I don't know how many female friends I have who are on dating apps and will connect with a black dude, and one of the first things that they dive into is how much money they make, or what their career is, or how successful they've been. And I don't know if that is some sort of way of overcompensating for any of the insecurities that we can't show. Black men, we can't show a lot of insecurities. So I don't know if that's a way to overcompensate for some of those insecurities, or if it's just a combination of all the things we talked about before. But I'm not surprised we don't see more black men in education. And even, black men that we do see in education, it is a pit stop to doing something else, whether it be becoming a principal or whatnot. We don't see a lot of lifelong black male educators. My father was one, which is why I think that kind of resonates with me quite a bit. But we just don't see it. We don't see it.
Yeah. I read a book when I was at Cal State LA. In one of the classes we had, we did like a book study, and I cannot remember the title of the book, but it was basically about black boys in school, and it was like different ways to approach it. And something that really stuck out to me, with the author wrote how when you see black males in education, you usually see them in three roles. You'll see them as the janitor, you'll see them as the gym teacher, or the administration. And it stuck out to me because I was like, wow, that is really poignant, because then I ended up going to my school, and what did we have? We had a black janitor, we had a black gym teacher, and the principal was a black male.
Right.
And so it's like this disconnection from the kids to see themselves in those different ways, or that is where they think that they have to fit, and that's not necessarily the case. Obviously, there's so many other things that they can do and be in education. Also, education in general is very maybe I read this in that book also, but it's very femicized. Like it is education is seen as white and female. And if you can't align to white culture, if you can't align to feminine culture, you are not successful in schools.
Right. It's why we need more cultural competence in schools. We need schools to be able to reflect the communities they represent and not reflect the teachers that are in the school. Like that's a massive issue. The idea also of the black male as the disciplinarian in the school of, we're having a problem with the black boys. Let's immediately run to the next black male teacher to take care of this and handle this or whatnot. And it's a double-edged sword because absolutely you want to make sure that these boys that are acting up are doing the right thing. You want to push them in the right direction, but you also are like, this is my role, this is my job at this point. Like you refuse to learn who they are and make a connection with them so that you can de-escalate the situation, and you just want to take the crutch of this person looks like them, so they should be able to understand them, so they'll handle it is a big issue.
Man, you just brought me back to a situation at Harvard when one of our classmates, I don't want to tell his stuff on the podcast. So I'm not gonna say his name, but there was a teacher who tried to connect him to one of the black boys in the school simply because he was another black male, and then brought up some connection of basketball. And if you know the person that I'm talking about, like there was really no connection of basketball. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it was just like, I remember standing next to him being like, why did she do that? It's like when that one girl, we were singing karaoke and she told me to go sing Selena, and I was like, why?
Yeah.
I love me a good Selena jam, but why?
Right. I can't sing Red Hot Chili Peppers up here.
Right?
Let me do. I gotta rap Outkast, which I can do both. But
right.
You will let me sing my Red Hot Chili Peppers too.
Right. I will fuck you up on Sweet Caroline. Don't mess with me. Anyway, well, what do you think in your life has like been the greatest lesson that you have learned that you take into the classroom with you for your students? Was it being a mascot in high school?
Oh man, when I say mascot, what I mean is I don't think my high school classmates, except for a few of them, really knew me very well. I was very popular. I was prom king, which is what my cousin to this day, my best friend, still calls me prom king around. He'll introduce me as prom king to people to this day. And I was
so you peaked in high school. That's what you're saying.
I was done at that point.
Got it.
Not until I lost. It's a longer story in college. I did good in college too. But I was student body president, all this stuff, right? But I think people saw me kind of as a mascot. They didn't really know me very well. They just knew me to be an entertaining person, nice guy, smart guy, whatever, right? But I don't think people really got to know me very well, except for a couple of people here and there. I think the biggest thing that I would take away, one of the lessons that I kind of live my life by is, there's two. One is, it's a quote: if nothing you do ever matters, then all that matters is what you do. And what I mean by that is, we live in a world where it feels like our day-to-day sometimes does not have an impact on the greater situation in the world. You throw a bottle in the recycling bin, and then you read an article the next day that says climate change is still happening. And you're like, oh man, I recycled. Like, why did this not? This didn't change, Or you donate to a cause, and homelessness is still an issue. All these things, right? Where it just feels like we do these little things, and sometimes they don't have a greater impact on our world. But the fact that we do those things says a lot about the message we're sending to the people around us. It is like this slow, incremental idea of the pay it forward mindset of like, if I do this nice thing for this person, maybe they'll do it for somebody else. And maybe they'll do it for somebody else. And eventually the whole world will change. It feels silly to think about that. But truth be told, I think in order to stay positive, and I'm a genuinely joyful, positive person. The world does not get me down really. And I think in order to stay that way, and the way I push my kids and my colleagues to think about it is like, what have you done today to just do something good for somebody else. And that might not change the world, but that changed that person's day. That changed their life within that moment. That might lead them to have an impact on somebody else. And so thinking about things on a micro level can help you get through things day by day with the impact that you have. And really that's really the big message there. The other one is from former basketball coach who passed away from cancer at North Carolina State University. He gave this speech about laugh, think, cry. And what he was saying was while he was dealing with terminal cancer, he just wanted every day to be like a full day, to be a day where like you felt like everything, you had a full day. Like you go to bed at night and said, that was a day. Like I had a day. Yeah. And his message was spend some time in laughter each day, spend some time in thought every day, have your emotions move you to tears. And that means whether it be something you just need to get out, you need to cry it out because you're dealing with a lot, or you're laughing so hard that you're crying because something's so funny to you, or just tears of joy of like you see something that just makes you feel good about yourself. Like living every day with the goal of like, I'm going to laugh a lot today. Like I'm going to bug out today. Like I'm going to lose it today. I'm going to spend some time in thought. I'm going to figure out, what I'm doing next, or I'm going to just think about the world in general. And I'm going to try to find something that moves my emotion. Maybe I'm not tearing up every time, but something that's going to move me emotionally, whether it be inspirational or whatever it is. I kind of feel like those are the two things I kind of push upon my students. Those are two things I push more educators because of our gig is so tough. I think that we need to have those types of full days and be able to realize the micro things that we do matter in the long run. So that's kind of where my head is at.
I'm so mad that they took that beautiful quote and turned it into live, laugh, love, and now it's over toilets all over suburban households.
I know. What does that even mean?
Because that's what I thought of right away.
Yeah, live, laugh, love.
Live, laugh, love. Beautiful. Are you ready to get into some Q&A?
Let's do it. Let's make it
We got
happen.
a couple of Q's that we're going to A.
Okay. All right. That's okay. Never mind.
Where's your brain going?
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so this was a hot one. Someone wrote to me that they are having a hard time. They're in grad school, and they are having a hard time with a professor that they just don't like. And so the question is, were there any professors at Harvard, and it could be anywhere else to be very honest, but were there any professors at Harvard that you didn't like?
It'd be very difficult. It's always difficult for me to talk about people I don't like because it sounds corny, but I genuinely either a person is kind of inconsequential to me because it's like I found some good in this person, but I don't really need anything from them going forward, or I find the good in people that a lot of people may have a hard time finding good in. Right. I will say broadly, I didn't dislike this professor. I got along with him. I will say broadly, there was a professor at the school that people were had their kind of ears to the ground anytime he would say something. And I remember he'd made a joke one time, and because people were very skeptical of like where his political beliefs were, he made a joke one time when somebody started to speak about, somebody was speaking about slavery and said something.
I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah. They said something about like these, enslaved persons or whatnot. And he said like, oh, you mean workers? And everybody paused. Everybody stopped.
Yep.
Because his joke was, it's ridiculous that Texas Tech, we're talking about textbooks and all the other things. Yeah. That these books refer to slaves as workers. As workers.
Right.
But because he had not shown himself to be a person that people would trust that it was coming from a place of humor as opposed to maybe a background thought. There was just a immediate reaction, right?
Yep.
So
that had the group chat running. I remember.
Yeah, it was blowing up. So a lot of people ended up having a, individual conversation with him, sit downs. He ended up apologizing for what he said. I believe he was sincere, and I believe he started to recognize like they don't necessarily view me as somebody who can say these types of things.
Right.
And so I would say to that person having a professor you don't like, I think it's important that if you feel like that professor is violating your humanity in any sort of way, shape, or form, right? I think that document everything that they've said, document any conversations that you've had, any emails, talk to some colleagues around you. Have they had the same experiences? and then bring that up to, whoever the superiors are, because if it's happening to you and you feel that way, I guarantee it happened to somebody the prior year, or it's going to happen to somebody next time until somebody says something about it. So, but if it's just like, I don't like this person, then, just finish class and get done with it.
Just move on.
Just get the grade and move on. Yeah, at that point.
I actually had, so the reason that I left Cal State LA was because I felt like I wasn't getting a good enough education there. I felt like the classes weren't meeting my standards. And I did have a professor who gave a class and started talking, I can't even remember it was about IQ. Like they were talking about intelligence and things like that. And she started making this comparison saying that our IQ is like a vehicle, and you're running around a route, like a lap, right? And that some people maybe are using a scooter, and some people are in a Honda Civic, and other people are in a Ferrari, right? So she started making this kind of comparison, which was a little bit going over my head because I was like, what's the purpose here?
Right.
And then she made a claim that sometimes the vehicle that people are given is, I forget the way that she verbalized it, but it was something to the effect that basically like some people inherit a crappy vehicle because of the neighborhood that you're born in and that you live in. And I was like, this is racist. Like, it was just like, really?
Right,
I was like, I don't like that. So that was something that bothered me, where I was like, I can't learn from this person who believes this thing.
Right.
And she was also one of the like heads of the program. So there was a lot of classes that I was taking with her. And I'm like, I cannot have my education be reliant upon this woman who has this central belief to her. And then when I transferred to Harvard, most of the instructors, I felt I aligned with their belief system, but there was one instructor who I really think singled me out. She didn't like that I was outspoken. Our group was pretty small, and I like, even it did affect my transcripts, because I got all A's in every single class except for the 2 that I took with her. I got B's, and I'm like, I even went in one time and I brought my paper to her, the paper that she scored really low. And I took one of my classmates and I'm like, this is a paper that you gave an A, and this is mine that you took all these points off, and I don't understand the discrepancy. I need you to explain it to me. And she like was like trying to double down on the reason that she gave me such low points. And I'm like, my writing isn't bad. I followed your rubric. Can you show me why you took these different points off? And she really couldn't explain it, to the effect, like, what it made me realize was that I was like, wow, this woman just doesn't like me. And I'm never going to be successful in this class. So it made me end up like pulling back. I actually tried to leave the program, and she pulled me back in to stay in the program. And you're absolutely right that other people, if you're facing a certain thing, other people probably are, because there were conversations that we had that other people were like, yeah, I'm having issues with her too. I'm having issues with her too. So it was a really tough experience having to deal with that, especially because like I think I'm a teacher's pet, and I wanted her to like me. I wanted her to support me, and it did end up affecting, I said, my transcripts. I had lower grades on there. I don't even have advice, because it's such a tough situation to be in, but it will probably happen,
Yeah.
That's the real part of it. Our next question is to what you were speaking to earlier. Is a master's degree worth it for classroom teachers?
I don't, unless you live in a state or you have a district that is going to give you master's pay.
What do you mean by master's pay?
So some districts will boost your pay if you get a master's in. If you are a social studies teacher, you get a master's in 20th century history or something like that, right? They'll boost your pay because the course that you got, your degree is now in something that can, like, theoretically make you a better teacher because you gain more knowledge on it. Or normally, I use social studies as an example. That's a terrible example because nobody cares about social studies. So it would probably be a math, a math degree or ELA degree or something like that. But ultimately, I think you have to think about, what do you want to do with that master's long term? And getting a master's in 20th century history is great if your district's going to pay you more long term for having that master's. and you plan to teach for 28, 30 years, right? Great. But if you think you're going to move careers, that master's is not going to be very beneficial to you for a career that you might want to choose outside of education, unless you want to be I don't know, you want to work in a museum, or you want to eventually get your PhD or whatnot, like something like that, right? I really don't think in the long run for a classroom teacher, 9 to 5, 8 to 4 classroom teacher, I really don't think a master's is worth it in the long run, because a lot of places are not giving master's pay. That master's pay is probably not going to be that much comparatively to what you would really need. And a lot of those masters that they accept are not masters that are going to be transferable to other careers you might want to have in the future. So, yeah, I thought it was interesting because there were a lot of folks who went to HGSE who worked in, I think your program was similar to that, right? Where a lot of people were going back in the classroom.
Yeah.
And I worked with a program at HGSE where we were training teachers to teach full time in the classroom with a master's from Harvard or whatnot.
Right.
So what are you, I mean, your thoughts on that? Like, I mean, you were more closely connected to that. You have colleagues that have gone back into education full time with it. You did for a little bit as well. Like, what are your thoughts?
Worth it is a tough word, because something being it has to be worthwhile to you.
Right.
So when I went to Cal State LA, I've always been a person who seeks education, right? So when I was at Cal State LA, I wanted to seek the education. It wasn't just about getting the master's. It was literally about learning for me. And what I found was that most of my classmates there were only doing it because of the boost in pay.
Yeah.
They weren't doing it because they sought more knowledge, really. And so they were very much part-time students. And that didn't align with my values and what I was trying to be there for, so it felt like a waste for me. When we went to HGSE, however, it was very clear that it attracted so many people who were education seekers, right? Who wanted to grow and learn in the field of education for whatever reason. We had strong morals that brought us to that place. And that's what, on the first podcast with Linda and Ashley, that's what we talked about, where it's not like Harvard was this beacon of hope. Harvard was a magnet that attracted all of us. And then that's what made the experience so great. So for me, it was worth it in the fact that I got that knowledge, I got that experience, I got that exposure, and then I took it and brought that to my students. And it was invaluable, the ways that I impacted my students by having that master's and that Harvard education, for sure. However, the cost of tuition, only now am I making more money than what our tuition cost was. I left the classroom, or I left Harvard, and I made at least $10,000-$15,000 less than how much that 1 year at Harvard cost. Yeah. So even with the boost in pay, because in Chicago we have steps and lanes with our pay, because we're a nice union town, and so you get paid for a master's plus. So because I had my master's at Harvard, and then I had credits from Cal State LA, I actually got a master's plus 15 credit hours. So I got paid a little bit higher, and it still was way less than what it cost to go to Harvard. And I just plan to die with those student loans. I've forgiven myself. I don't need the government to forgive me. So in terms of cost, it was invaluable to me. I would 100% do Harvard over and over again. Yeah. But that's because I'm a knowledge seeker. That's because I wanted that experience. I wanted that information. Even joining the clubs, there's no price that I could put on that. I wouldn't have the job that I have today if it wasn't for that master's program. Yep. I wouldn't obviously know you. A majority of my closest friends are from that experience, so for sure it was worth it. But I was not getting that at Cal State LA, which was a program that was geared towards classroom teachers. So
I think to rephrase, I guess what I was saying is, I think a master's is absolutely worth it for knowledge seekers. I agree with you 1,000%. That's the case. I have zero regrets. In fact, wherever the opposite of a regret is what I have about my experience at HGSE, and would have been maybe similar if I'd gone to any other grad school. Who knows? But I really want people out there to consider what ultimately do you want in the long run? For me, I knew going to HGSE was not going to do anything for my direct teaching career. I knew I was going to have to find a job different from that. But I also said to myself, I'm going to take on this debt because I want to do this. Like, I know I'm going to be in debt, but I want to do this, so this matters to me. So if you are willing to take that on and you have the capacity to be able to take that on, do whatever you want to do. Enjoy yourself to the fullest you should, gathering that knowledge. And more importantly, that I was seeing a young lady out here for a little while, and she did not have a great experience at HGSE at all. And I did.
Our year?
But no, she was in a different year.
Okay,
so no gossip from there.
I'm like, who?
Yeah, right. I was seeing her for a little while, and but the thing we agreed on was we met phenomenal people that changed our lives as individuals. And I think that experience there's no cost on that type of experience. There's no price on that type of experience. So I agree with you 1,000%. But if you are very career-minded, very career-focused, very stuck in the lane of like, how do I advance my career? I don't know if a master's if you're just going to stay in the classroom full-time is worth it in the long run. But, I mean, to each their own.
To each their own. Yeah, you have to make the decision that's right for you. I'm a big fan of doing your pros and your cons list, and all of I have Post-its everywhere where I'm like just writing out my ideas. That's how I kind of figure all of that out. But it was definitely worth it for me. I loved all the entire experience, but I didn't get that at the other school that I was at for sure.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you. My undergrad was a place where I did get that. What I loved about HGSE, to balance them out, my undergrad was an experience where I did meet lifelong friends and had a phenomenal experience on campus. But HGSE was so different because I was an adult having that experience again and with like-minded people. I made a lot of great friends in undergrad, and not always like-minded. We talked about it politically or career-wise, but HGSE had that ultimate combination of just awesome, phenomenal people, as well as people who also cared about the same thing that I did. And this is exactly why by the way, folks, Sabrina and I were talking earlier about I was going to hold my mic the entire time.
Yes.
And the idea was me not to hold my mic. So what y'all didn't just see was I was just moving my hands together like I was bringing the world together. And I realized if I was holding the mic, I wouldn't be able to do that.
You wouldn't be able to do that.
I wouldn't be able to do that,
Yeah, and this is a podcast.
I know, we're gesture. We people of color are gestury people. We gesture all the time to get our stuff.
Yes.
That's what we do.
Yeah, I love it. It's beautiful. Yeah, we express ourselves with our hands, right? Right. Well, we've been sitting here talking for way too long. I don't even know if people are going to get to the end of this podcast because this is a long one, and I'm going to have to edit out all of my ums to make sure that it shortens up a little bit. But this just proves what wonderful conversation we have.
True. Very true.
Right?
Very true. Very true.
I appreciate you taking the time to like talk about your life and your history and sharing all of this with me and with us.
Yeah, I think you're doing a wonderful, wonderful job. I think about my when I try this and how much better you are at your organization, at putting this together, finding the guests, advertising, all these different things that you're doing just makes this such a wonderful thing. I think at one point in time in the future, you should have the three of us, me, Jabari, and Ashley, and you, on one for a free-for-all. I think that one might need some heavy editing at some point, but I think
we can't say half the stuff that we say.
That's true. That's very true.
You got a lot of problematic jokes.
I appreciate it. I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, I did take lots of lessons from you, and I asked you, your advice. And one of the things I was like really trying hard on was making sure that I was funny, because you were like, you're so funny in real life and you were a dud on my podcast. So I'm trying to be funny on the podcast as well. Have I succeeded? Did I make a couple of jokes?
This is so naturally you now from the first time that we did this. And I think it's awesome. Like, you're doing great. This is brilliant. This is genius.
I'm trying. Thank you.
Yeah,
I realize that sometimes when I'm recorded, I've done lives with people, I've done other podcasts, and I'm like, why am I so stuck up? Like, I sound stuck up, and I'm trying not to, because I know that I am a hilarious person, and I'm like, I want the world to know this.
It is one of your biggest qualities. I look forward to seeing your guests in the near future, too, because I think a lot of times your guests bring that out of you, too. Like, you're different. Obviously, your mother's episode was hilarious and different, a different type of funny than mine or Ashley and Linda's in the first time. But yeah, all this is wonderful. This is great. I'm rambling.
Thank you. Yeah. I so appreciate you, friend. Well, do you have anything that you want to share with folks that you want them to follow, to listen to? Anything.
So first, I will promote my father's book, What We Blacks Need to Do.
Fantastic.
That is my father's book. It is available through Frizen Press. Maybe in the show notes or whatnot, I can get a link and put in there. Also, if you want to listen to Sabrina's original episode, Mr. Hankins Opus podcast it's on iTunes or whatnot. For sure, podcast. Check that out. I think the actual episode it's called Educated Latina, which is interesting considering how far we've come from that to where you are now or whatnot. So if you want to listen to 4-year-old, or not 4-year-olds, but 4-year earlier Sabrina, then check that one out too. There's also one with Ashley as well. That's there as well. So if you heard her from the first episode, check hers out as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it until my script actually hits the world. So I can't talk about that yet, but we'll see.
We'll have you back on to talk about that when it comes out.
Cool. All
right. Well, thank you, James. I really appreciate you.
Yes, I appreciate you too. I thought you had more to say, but that's fine.
Nope, that's it. Okay, I just appreciate you.
Yeah, all right, cool.
Ridiculous. All right, I'm going to stop recording.
All right, sounds good.